are crop production and honeybees compatible? And so yeah, I think that is our main aim, to see how can we work together, because we have to have a mutual approach to keep our bee population sustainable and growing, because there's a growing demand for bees, and the forage is really falling apart due to veld fires, the chopping down of blue gums, and yeah, the people have totally lost the plot there. But nevertheless, I'm not going to go in there. Gerhard, I'm going to hand over to you, otherwise we're going to take up too much time. I normally talk too much and do too little. So, but we're looking forward to listening to you. And yeah, a warm welcome again.
Thank you very much, Johan, and all the guests. I don't know who of you as guests are farmers or bee farmers. There are maybe some government officials also in the meeting this morning, but from my side also welcome. And thank you very much, Johan, for organizing this engagement with you guys, because if there's one person in the country who shares your passion about the bees, I think that's me. I've been on this bandwagon for a long time, and I've been in bitter feuds and bitter fights within my own industry, which is the plant protection industry, and with the farming sector, and even with the Beekeepers Association at some stages. But in the end, the objective from all of us should be to make sure that we take the best possible care of the bees, which are very important not only for crop production, but also for the biodiversity of the country. I'm going to do a presentation which I've done, I think, once or twice in the past, but I'm going to elaborate a lot on the stuff today. So I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to take it slowly. And I would like anybody, if you have a question, don't even raise your hand, just some talk in between. You can speak in Afrikaans, you can speak in English. I will keep my stuff in English, but you're most welcome to talk to me in any other language. I'm going to start off with, I hope you can all see the screen. I'm going to start off with the one thing that catalyzed, I just want to close down some of the things here. The one thing that catalyzed the whole story about bees and pesticides, not that the pesticide issue has never been there for bees, but in around 2003, we started picking up the first rumors from Europe about a molecule called imidacloprid. So you see the molecule there. It is one of the so-called neonicotinoids, and there are basically 6 or 7 of them, 5 of which in South Africa, and I can name it for you. Imidacloprid is perhaps the oldest one and the most well-known one. Then there's thiamethoxam, there's clothianidine, there's acetamiprid, and there's thiacloprid. And then there's a related compound called fipronil, which is a little bit different in the chemical nature and the chemical structure from the normal nicotinoids, but it works very much the same as the neonicotinoids. And the advantage at the time when Bayer launched this new molecule and Syngenta came in with thiamethoxam was that it was an extremely systemic. In other words, the days of having to spray your crops with a contact insecticide to kill particular plant pests or things like typical insects or arachnid type of pests were over. So especially for some of the fruit crops, there was a potential to apply the chemical systemically by doing a soil drench, and then the plant takes it up into the plant itself, and it protects the plant then against sucking and biting insects. But it was also started, it also started to make its way into the seed business. Now, the seed business is mainly for the high value crops, like some of the vegetable crops, and then what we call the typical cash crops. In other words, all the cereal crops like wheat and maize and barley and oats and those types of things, because if you plant a seed like that in the soil, every damn thing on earth that eats a plant will come along to try and also participate in the eating of that particular thing. And the neonicotinoids had a very good system for the seed themselves, because as you cover the seed with the neonicotinoids and you plant the seed, when the plant germinates, it takes up the neonicotinoid in its entire system, and it protects that little plant for at least 6 weeks after germination, which is a very neat way of doing what we would like to call a target selective way of applying a pesticide. You see, whereas in the past, you would have to plant your seed, wait for them to germinate, and then start throwing the things like the chlorpyrifos and all those harsh chemicals onto them. Whereas with a seed treatment with a neonicotinoid, you do it once and you plant the plant, and for 6 weeks you don't have to worry, because nothing that comes and chews or sucks or bites the plant will survive. Unfortunately, the technology was handed over to the farming sector itself. Now, I'm not going to belittle any farmers today, or any beekeeper, or anybody, or myself. I'm just going to make simple statements. So unfortunately, it was handed over to the farming community all over the world. And farmers were allowed to make their own seed dressings using especially imidacloprid. And they didn't have the right equipment on the farm, so it was very much a bucket and spade mixture of the chemicals onto the seed. And when they plant the seed, there was a lot of dust coming off, and that dust was floating all around the environment. And the first massive pawpaw hit the fan in France a couple of years ago, and you can see that what happens when you plant this dust and stuff. So the pawpaw hit the fan in France, where there was massive bee die-offs after the planting of seed for cash crops. And I'm talking about bee die-offs in the natural environment or other flowering crops around that particular cash crop field. And that sent the spikes into the air, and the red flags went up all over the place, to the extent that everybody started getting very jittery about the neonicotinoids on seed in particular. And there was a global call for a ban in 2003 already at that time for neonicotinoids not to be used as seed dressings, and that would have really annihilated a lot of the normal cash crop farming, because the older chemicals that were used for protection were basically gone, and the newer chemicals now had a problem. And yet they were used, especially in North America, to a certain extent in South America and South Africa, obviously, because our agriculture is on the same level as that in Europe and then in the European Union. So that is where the big fight started around, especially the neonicotinoids and the bees. Now, to give you an idea of just the spectrum of what is toxic to a bee, and I'm going to go back into basic toxicologist, because I'm an environmental toxicologist, not really human toxicologist, and I study and I work with the impacts of toxins, not only pesticides, on wildlife and environment. And to me, the bees are part of the environment, or a very important part of the environment. And you must always understand that, like the father of toxicology said many eons ago in the Middle Ages, that all substances are toxic. There's nothing that is not a toxin. It is only the dosage that makes it the difference between something which is a toxin and something which is a remedy. And to give an example for those of you that don't know about toxicology, if you take normal, can everybody just switch off their mics, because otherwise you disturb the whole story. If you look at normal paracetamol tablets, you can easily take a gram of paracetamol tablets. I'm going to use it right now in Panado to cure a headache or any body aches. It takes about 20 minutes to work, and it's a medicine. In other words, it's a remedy. But we find that if people start taking overdosing, and we get a lot of paracetamol poison in the country, because people sometimes swallow 7 tablets in one go, and that then becomes toxic. In other words, a substance's toxicity to an organism is related to the dosage that you offer to that particular organism. And all of you in the Western Cape will know that we've got pyrethroids, we've got carbamates, we've got neonicotinoids, We've got the new diamides. We've got the new spiroketals like spirotetramat and spiromesifen and those types of things. We've got indoxacarb and so on and so on. And every individual chemical or pesticide has its own toxicity towards honeybees. And honeybees are always listed in the toxicology textbook because that's a parameter for insecticide safety in terms of the particular compound. So bees are our biomarker, in other words, for pesticide toxicity. Now, when you look at a normal pesticide, and I'm going to take dimethoate that you should know very well, which is used widely on things like canola and things like wheat and so on for wheat aphid and Russian wheat aphid. It is toxic to a bee. It is not safe for a bee, especially if you spray the bee directly with dimethoate. Okay? But then if you take a typical pyrethroid, and you all know cypermethrin, you all know permethrin, you all know things like deltamethrin, alpha cypermethrin, lambda cyalomethrin. These things are, well, I'm still looking for the word, but I can only tell you they are extremely toxic to a bee. So the toxicity is at the level of a nanogram or even less than a nanogram on contact with a bee. In other words, if a nanogram of deltamethrin make contact with a bee, that bee is basically gone. Now for bees, we've got two ways of measuring the toxicity. First is the oral intake of the particular pesticide, or then the dermal contact of the particular insecticides. And we mostly find with bee mortalities that the contact is more severe, and scientifically it is also more toxic for contact to a bee than the oral intake for a bee, because a bee, thank God for the bees, they've got a very, very active internal gut flora which helps to detoxify chemicals very rapidly. But if you make dermal contact, in other words, if that pesticide minute droplet makes contact with the bee on the wings or the body or the carapace of the bee or even the legs, then it is more toxic than the oral intake. So the contact toxicity of the neonicotinoids for the bees in all the cases are at the levels of nanograms per bee. So we can't measure it in milligrams per kilogram like for mammals because the bee is too small. So we measure it on the individual bee. So for the neonicotinoids and the pyrethroids, toxicity is absolutely vast. And it's about the same level of toxicity between the group of neonicotinoids and the group of pyrethroids. So whenever you spray a pyrethroid or whenever you spray a neonicotinoid, there is a vast chance of having a severe impact of bees if the bees are contacted by the spray mixture. Now, where does the problem or the difference comes in between the pyrethroids and the neonicotinoids? Pyrethroids are contact insecticides. They're not systemic. So if you apply cypermethrin, for example, in a jug at the bottom of a citrus tree, for example, or your vineyard or an apple tree, that will sit in the soil there. It will kill a couple of soil gogos or the ants, which will be controlled. But the plant cannot take up the pyrethroid in its systems. In other words, it cannot go from the plant roots into the cambium, into the plant, into the leaves and the foliage, and into the flowers and the pollen and nectar. That is technically completely impossible. And all the tests in the world prove that. Whereas when you work with a neonicotinoid and the associated one, which I mentioned, the fipronil, which is mostly used as a soil drainage, the plant has the ability to take it up in the system with the root system. It goes into the plant, all over the plant. It gets deposited all over the plant. And that is what systemicity means in terms of an insecticide or even some of the fungicides that can do that, or some of the herbicides like glyphosate. And if you then do the wrong application, in other words, if you overdose on your orange or your citrus trees, there is a possibility that that neonicotinoid that then, like this imidacloprid, can actually then end up in the pollen and the nectar of the particular tree that you're working with. And you will see that the neonicotinoids are very seldom indicated on the label for use on stone and palm fruit. It is very much on things like, for example, citrus. So because of the growth difference between the two different types of plants or the two different groups of plants, it is not applicable to stone and pome fruit. It is applicable to citrus in particular. And extensive studies conducted by the registration of all the companies who invented these compounds have shown that if you apply the neonicotinoid or the fipronil strictly according to label. Now, I'm not talking about label guidance, and there's one mistake that people make, which I will talk about just now, but let's go back to my statement. If you apply the imidacloprid or the thiamethoxam, or for example, the fipronil, strictly by label instructions to your citrus tree, the chance of that flower and the pollen and the nectar having any residue in that flower or pollen or nectar of the neonicotinoid like imidacloprid or the fipronil is absolutely very, very limited. But the problem comes in that many people, and I've got to point the finger now at Albura, that many people do not follow the label instructions, and that is why we see sometimes that bees take a knock because there are residues of the neonicotinoids in some of the flowers of the plants, and that knocks them back. And you must understand one thing, that people start off with toxicological studies in the laboratory, but you cannot only take a laboratory study as the norm. You've got to go and repeat your laboratory study in the field. And those of you that are natural scientists and even the farmers understand that what you do in the lab is not always replicated 100% the field. Of course, the field conditions are different. The climate is different. It's a more harsh condition. So it doesn't mean that if you test thiamethoxam on bees in the laboratory and you show that it ends up in the nectar and pollen of a citrus orchard, it is going to be that same replication in the field. It might be different, but there is a chance for these compounds to end up in the pollen nectar, and that is why there's such a hell of an outcry against the neonicotinoids globally, which was started then by blatant wrongful use in terms of seed dressings for seed in other parts of the world. Now, you've also all heard about this syndrome of colony collapse disorder, which was first identified in North America, especially in the USA, and then in Europe, and then in a few other parts of the world. And the world went completely ballistic about this, and everything was blamed on pesticide impacts. And all of you know Mike Alsop, who's I would think the country's lead bee specialist. Brendan and company know him very well. He's always on the bees, and I'm talking to him very regularly. But everything was pointing to pesticides being the cause of this colony collapse disorder in North America. And you can see the stats there that 31% of the bee colonies were lost because of something. I'm going to talk about something. I'm not going to talk about what it is in the time from 2012 to 2013. But take note there, it was in the winter of 2012 and 2013. And the blame came directly, immediately back to the neonicotinoid pesticides because of what happened in France with that dust coming off, and what happened in other parts of the world where people used the stuff incorrectly and overdosed. And then the second load of hell broke out around the neonicotinoid pesticides. But if you look at things pragmatically, there is no denial that the neonicotinoid pesticides do have an impact on bees, especially if you do not follow label instructions. I can tell you, if I look at my toxicology handbook, which is lying in front of me, I look at the toxicity of, I'm going to look it up now, of imidacloprid, and I want to tell you what it is because it is pretty scary. There is no doubt in my mind that the wrongful use of imidacloprid will have a massive impact on bees. And I can tell you now, the LD50, I don't find that for that particular one, but I will find it for something else. The LD50 for a bee, which means the dose required to kill half of a bee colony in one of your beehives of things like thiamethoxam is 0.009 nanogram per bee, which is hardly measurable. It is extremely toxic. So we cannot deny that neonicotinoid pesticides, if used incorrectly, will and shall have an impact on bees. But we know for a fact that in North America, the varroa mite is an enormous problem. You guys in the Western Cape, your your bee farmers, and you beekeepers know that the varroa mite infestations do have an impact. I don't think the impact is that vast at this stage. When I spoke to Mike last, he told me that you've got it fairly well under control by management techniques. So that has also an impact on the bees. And then American foul brood and also African foul brood, which broke out in the Western Cape and has also spilled over to the Eastern Cape, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. Also in America, had a massive impact on the bee population. In South Africa, the impact is there. You will know as beekeepers what the impact is. I'm not sure, is it a 5% or a 10%, but I've seen pictures and slides that Mike showed us in Oudtshoorn a couple of years ago, and some of the highs looked very, very, very bad in terms of that particular disease infestation. What we also have to take into account, and I think when Johan mentioned that earlier on, Brendan also, is the food situation. Now, if you take the food away from the world, there won't be a single human being left after 6 months. Maybe that's a good idea because our population is far too numerous, but nothing can survive without food. And it brings me back to the colony collapse disorder in America in the winter. Now, we live in South Africa, which is, I still think, the best country in the world to live in, despite all the crap we've got with the government and the political parties and the looting and blah, blah, blah. But our climate is fantastic. Okay, we've had a couple of harsh years with drought and stuff, but our winters are fairly mild compared to the USA. If you look at the USA, and I've got a couple of Boer friends that went across now to go and work there, and they send me the pictures back of a farm which is 1 meter deep in snow. Now, thank God I don't have to work there because I don't think I will ever make it. And you can understand when you've got such a harsh winter and there's no flowering plants, the bees are going to take a knock because there's no food. And what we know in South Africa, and we've seen it in, or I've seen it in many parts, having spoken to many of my farmer buddies and my environmental buddies and my beekeeper buddies all over the country, is the bees are virtually starving in the winter because of food shortage. Now, the Karoo bee population, as far as I'm concerned, is technically gone. Now, I'm saying this because I got friends in the Karoo and family living all over the Karoo, from the southern Karoo, Beaufort West, right up to the Kalahari. And I can tell you, their farms are completely denuded of any plant life. So there is nothing to eat for anything. Not for a steenbok, not for a scrubby, not for the Karoo that used to live there, the springbok, and certainly not for the bees, because the Karoo shrubs like the Ghana bosses and all the Karoo bushes, they're also gone. So the food shortage is a massive problem. And that is not only for the Karoo, but also for the other zones that you see massive fires taking out vegetation, the grasslands taking a beating every year with things like that. So food plays a critical role, but I think it's unjustified then to point the finger at neonicotinoid pesticides, say, but that is the main cause of the colony collapse disorder, because there's so many other factors that come into play with the general health of bees. What I know for a fact, and I've discussed it with many of the bee scientists in my company, is that I'm talking about humanity is creating a problem for ourselves and the environment and for the bees by having monocultural food crops. Now, if you drive up, like I live in Port Elizabeth, and I travel to Karoo, which is fantastic, and then I eat what we call the millipap forest of the Free State. It is thousands upon thousands upon thousands hectares of one particular crop, which is not beneficial to bees. Now, how the hell can a bee survive in the Free State if there's only mealies? Yeah, I know mealie farmers, I think, are the best in the world. Their cropping is fantastic. Their harvests are increasing every year, doing the right thing. But there's no place for a bee there. So, and that's not only for the cash crops, but if you look at, for example, let's just take fruit crops, for example, and the citrus fruit, the stone and palm fruit, and the citrus fruit, and the berries, and whatever our farmers cultivate. We always have the tendency as people to take a wild plant and start selecting for better production and eventually end up with a monocultural food crop. And I can tell you, when I worked on the banana farms in the Wuba in my young years, we only have 2 strains of bananas in the country. It's the William and the Cavendish banana. Only 2 cultures of banana crops in the country. And very much the same goes with a lot of our food crops. I know, for example, in the peaches and the pears and stuff, there are a couple of different cultures. But basically, it means that a bee eats the same food every day. And that cannot be healthy for any organism. It's like, I'm a meat eater. Yes, man, I can, if I'm really hungry, I can eat a quarter lamb in one shot. So if I just eat lamb every single day, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to certainly frack out 100%. So that's why I force myself to eat a carrot now and again, and maybe lick a chicken. But if you feed an animal only the same food every day, you don't get all the vitamins and all the minerals and all the other little elements in to make it a healthy food basket for that particular thing. And I think many of our bees are hammered because they are living on monocultural food crops. In other words, they only get their food from, for example, let's say sunflower, or they work in canola, or they work, for example, in things like gum trees. So that, to me, I see as a big problem. So that compromises the health of the organism. And once you add on the other things, that will then start having a compounded impact on the bee population in your particular hives. Now, what I've also heard from Mike Alsop, and this is where you beekeepers are maybe going to get red in the face and shout at me and tell me I'm talking rubbish, but I've heard it from many people that I think we overwork our bees. Now, go back to what the Bible says. The Bible says you should work for 7 years and take 1 year off. Have you ever heard of that happening in the modern world? We don't even have a normal Sunday anymore. You can go even to some backs on Sunday. But if your bees work every single month of the year to do pollination, they never have a rest period. And that adds on the stress. Now, you all know what happened in KZN with the looting and the burning down of the warehouse of one of our member companies in Konubia. I've been on that thing for the past month until 11 o'clock every night, and I feel like a bee today. I'm completely exhausted. I had COVID, and you can understand what a poor bee must feel like if that bee has been working non-stop over all seasons to do pollination and never had a time just to go and sit on his backside, have a beer, and do bugger all. And if you add all these things into one pot, then there is going to be a definite impact on the bees. But you cannot single out the pesticides as the main reason for the colony collapse disorder, or for the decline of our managed bees, or for the wild bees in South Africa in particular. So all I'm telling you is that we need to look at our bees from a holistic perspective. And as a beekeeper, and as a crop farmer, and me as an environmentalist, we all have a duty to make sure we give our bees the best chance to survive, and that is making sure the pesticides are used strictly according to what the label says, and that we make sure the bees have forage. And I've been talking to Sabio, but I don't think I got a very good ear there the last time I spoke to them. I've been talking to our own member companies in CropLife, and some of them start picking up on this, and I've been talking to other people and say, let us plant food for the bees. Now, I see South Africa as an enormously wealthy country, not in terms of money, but in terms of biodiversity. We've got 24,000 flowering plants. It is the highest biodiversity of plant life, apart from that which you find in Costa Rica. So we've got aloes, which bloom in winter. We've got a lot of summer flowering plants. We've got little mesembryanthemums that flower in winter. So if you just plant those plants around your crops, around your farms, then your farm can support the bees in the time when the beekeepers don't have a crop that they've got to pollinate, and where the bees can harvest their normal food and survive. So to me, we can make a plan for the food shortage. There's not much we can do about the monocultural food crops because we've got this 8.5 billion hungry mouths to feed every day. But the beekeeper must also look after the bees and maybe cycle the bees and give the bees a chance to rest. It's like, for example, when I write up management plans for chemical factories where they make pesticides, I always tell them that, remember, that person working in that pesticide factory is exposed to pesticide fumes and vapors day to day. So you work a person for 3 months, and you take the person out to go and work in another part of the factory for 3 months to give him a time to escape those particular pesticide fumes. And the same should be done with bees. Sometimes the bees need to rest, sometimes they need to work. So you got to work out a management plan to give your bees a chance to also sit on the beach and watch the waves and do bugger all. And then the management of pests and diseases, that is something that I think requires a lot of attention. And I'm horrified to hear very often that there are beekeepers that use insecticides inside a beehive to kill varroa mites. And I've even heard that people fumigate their beehives with things like dichlorphos or with aluminium phosphide to kill varroa mites. Now, I don't want to be nasty here, but if I've ever heard something totally idiotic, then that must be the top of the charts, because those things are extremely toxic to bees. They do not break down easily, especially in a beehive. They go into that wood that you use for the beehive, and they go into the supers, and that will stay there for a time. And you've got no chance of having a re-established healthy colony in that particular beehive if you use those harsh pesticides. And then the American foulbrood, I think that's the case of how you manage your bees, that you can work it out of the system and not transporting bees all over the place. But coming back to that particular one, you know that there's certain quarantine measures that have to be abided by in terms of moving bees around, I think especially from the Western Cape into other parts, because of the African bee and because of foulbrood and varroa infestations. And then I hear from people in the Sanders River Valley that there's somebody from here, from the Western Cape, who traveled overnight under the cover of darkness and the moon to brought the bees here. And obviously that person becomes a vector then to transfer infestation of diseases like American African foulbrood and also possibly varroa mites. So us as people are the ones that are going to destroy the world. Nothing else. It's because we take a chance, and every time we take a chance, you've got to ask the question, but what is going to happen? And when I do my training courses for people and for my students, I always tell them the one thing that I miss in our modern society is this concept of consequential thinking. And consequential thinking is a practice that you implement yourself as a human being to ask the question, if I do this particular thing right now, what is the consequence of that immediately after my action, and in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? In other words, if I decide now, okay, I've got varroa mites, I take all the bees out, I fumigate that beehive with dichlorphos or with aluminium phosphide, what is the consequence? And the answer should be, you're going to totally stuff up your bee colony with that, and therefore you should not do it. But very few people have the ability, or I think the willingness, to ask the question, what is going to happen if I take a particular action? So our bees in South Africa, our wild bees, I think are fairly safe. And I want to point a very nasty and dirty finger here at the South African National Biodiversity Institute, because they were part and parcel of the meetings I called many years ago. I said to them, but from my perspective, a bee, the honeybee, should be a specially protected species in the country. And let me tell you, right to today, which is the 25th of August 2021, bees have no legal protection under any act of any flipping nature. And it blows my mind that we worry about lions and leopards and elephants and rhinos and blah, 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 and all these things. But the one thing that will keep our crops going and keep our biodiversity going in terms of the plant life has no legal protection in the country whatsoever to say that you may not kill a bee. And I've been at loggerheads with the government about this, and I fight government every day on many levels. But I would still like to see, before I retire one day, that we got some form of formal protection for our honeybees. Now, to give you some background on where we as CROPLIFE SA started, and CROPLIFE SA is the industry association for the plant science companies. In other words, what people would call normally the pesticide companies in South Africa. And we've got pesticide companies that work very strongly on the chemical side. We've got some of them that only work on biologicals, and most of them work on a combination of biological pesticides and the chemical pesticides, and all of them are part and parcel of CROPLIFE SA. So when I saw the writing on the wall in 2020, that was before the thing hit us about the neonicotinoids in 2013. I saw the writing on the wall because I started getting calls from all over the country of bee colonies invading, for example, a home and a garden and a chimney and a meter box or whatever you call it in a municipality. And there was wanton killing of bees all over the place where people went out and they simply poisoned the bees. Now I asked myself, yes, how the hell can you go out? You've got a bee colony sitting in a meter box that can be trapped by a proper beekeeper, and you simply go and you put a poison in and you kill the bees. And I really stopped my moor completely and I said, that stops right now. So I called a meeting in 2012 to discuss this issue about the bees and the bee safety. So we got ourselves as the plant protection industry, in other words, CROPLIFE SA. We did have people there from SANBI, the National Biodiversity Institute. We had people then from the Agricultural Research Council. We also called in SAPCO, which is the professional pest control industry, because many of their members are the ones who go and some of them do the right thing and they remove the bees. So they got training from people like Mike Alsop and Sabio to go and remove bees and put them back into safety or in the hands of a good beekeeper. But some of them also go and then they kill the bees. We also had Sabio very much involved there. Department of Agriculture was there but not very highly representative, and we called Agri SA in, which was at that stage the largest representative farmers in the country, and we called in producer organizations, and we called the workshop to discuss what is going on in terms of the neonicotinoid situation in South Africa, and then this wanton killing of bees that happen when bees invade a particular place. Now you must understand, people say, but I don't want the bees in my house. And I get that question at least once a week. I don't want the bees in my house. They're going to sting me. And the first thing I asked them was, who was there first, you or the bee? And if you're stupid enough to build a house that has a very nice place for the bees to set up a colony, then I don't have much sympathy for you. And I hope you get the gist of my talk today. I don't like my own species very much. I'm much more inclined to side with the side of the wild animals because they will keep the planet going and not so much the people. So, but I get these questions every week and I get all the calls about the bee poisonings. And it's devastating to talk to a farmer who lost his entire bee colony or his entire beekeeping operation because of one single incident. So what CropLife SA did in 2012, based on the first rumors about the neonicotinoid impacts on bees, is we drew up a position statement on the CNIs. It's also called the chloronicotinyls or the neonicotinoids, as I mentioned all the time now. And we pleaded that we do away with foliar application of any neonicotinoids on crops. Now, we were quite successful in removing a lot of the foliar application from labels, but there are a couple of exceptions. But where there are exceptions, I forced the companies to put a stewardship program in behind. In other words, there's particular and intensive training of the farmers for that particular crop to prevent the possible negative impact of that application on a flowering crop. When you apply a CNI or a neonicotinoid on a non-flowering plant, for example, a cypress tree, which takes it up in the soil systemically, there cannot be an impact. But the moment you talk about a flowering plant, there is a potential impact. So we drew up a position statement, which we drew up between ourselves, and it was primarily the pest control industry. And we tabled that with the Registrar of Act 36 of 1947. And there was absolutely no support for that to this day. And if they don't agree with that, they can come to the High Court, and I will show the High Court there was no support for that whatsoever. So I'm disappointed in the Agriculture Department not supporting us in making the neonicotinoids safer for the bees, at least in the country. But what we also included in our statement there was what to do when you have an invasion by bees. Now, you as beekeepers, and I get the impression today that I'm preaching to the converted people here, because I see all my bee buddies like Brendan and so on. And those are the people I rely on heavily when I get the call from members of the public, say, but I've got bees in my chimney, want them out, make a plan. And I know I can call on them to go and remove the bees. So between them and Mike Elsop, who came from the ARC, we drew up a schedule of what to do when you've got a category 1 to category 4 bee invasion. Category 1 invasion means you do nothing. You leave the bees. And when I lived in Joburg, I often had bee colonies in my garden. And yeah, they did pluck, they did give me a clap down again. But luckily, I'm one of those lucky people in the world that only feel the sting, but I don't feel any pain or burning or anything like this. Not that I'm saying it will all be bees like that. So to me, that's a non-entity. So that situation, you have a total hands-off, you leave the bees completely. And number 2 means where the bees may pose a risk to people or their pets. And that's when you call upon the beekeeper or a professional pest control operator that had training to go and try and trap the bees and remove the bees. And number 3 category is where there's an immediate risk of a really high impact on people or their farm animals or their livestock, and you have to remove the bees as of immediately. Okay? And then we've got the last category, which says that the risk is so high and you can't get the bees out, for example, in these old double cavity walls in houses where there are bees, they're busy stinging people, and I've had cases where people died and where their dogs died and some of their own poultry died. In that case, then we said, okay, in that case, if you can't remove the bees and there's a grave risk of death occurring amongst people and animals, then you would allow extermination of the bees. Our problem is that we don't have a single pesticide which registers for that. And Mike Elsop is the one that I call upon then to advise how to kill the bees. So there is a way to kill that colony without using a pesticide because it's unlawful to use a pesticide. But we always try to steer people away from killing and say, do your level best and get the bees out. And I spoke to a beekeeper about 4 months ago. He had a scenario like number 4 where there was a grave danger. The bees were in a hollow cavity in the wall, and he went out and vrachtig, he managed to trap the entire colony in a beehive and with the queen, and he took them out and the problem was solved. So I always believe there's a solution to any particular problem when you come to a situation like this. What we also do, and that's where I collaborate closely with people like Mike and with the Sabio people and Department of Agriculture with the inspectorate. And I must say that part of agriculture is still working damn good, so they help me a lot. When we have bee mortalities because of pesticides, we do investigations, we try and find out what happened. And I can tell you in every single case, it was because of incorrect application of a pesticide which caused the bee mortalities. In some cases, sometimes even deliberate application of a pesticide to kill the bees. So, man, it makes you blistering angry when you get a call on a Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock, from a bee farmer in Mossel Bay said, I just lost 40 hives because somebody sprayed a chemical unlawfully on a particular crop. But we do the investigation. We try and help the farmers out in that particular one. Then we also drew up a pollinator charter, which says, this is what we as society should do to safeguard our bees. And that was drawn up by CROPLIFE SA, with the support of Agri-SA, with the support of our members, and many producer organizations. We've got, for example, we've got Hawker, we've got Winpro, we've got the Macadamia Growers Association, we've got Subtrop, and we've got many, many producer organizations that support the charter. The problem is that the charter is not being abided by or really taken to heart by many of the producers themselves on the ground. But it is there, it's on the CropLife SA website. It was signed off and published a couple of months ago. And we try and get people to read the stuff and to understand that if you follow the charter, there is no reason why a single bee in the country should fall down because of pesticide impacts. And then we also offer mitigation workshops now. Obviously, with the lockdown, we couldn't do much, but I did a hell of a lot of them before the lockdown. And those seem to have had quite a positive impact, where we talk in groups between crop farmers and beekeepers, and that, I think it worked well. And Brendan will remember we had a couple in the Western Cape. Some of them were quite heated, but I don't like to have a day without a good fight. So sometimes we fight, but we always come out with a resolution on what should be done to safeguard the bees, because we have, I think every South African Doesn't matter what your culture, your background, your language, religion, or what you do for a business. Every South African has a duty of responsibility to make sure we safeguard our bees. But let me give you a couple of the real nasty stories. And I can't remember the dates. I'm not going to reflect on that. I'm just going to tell you that there were these incidents. We had an incident about 4 years ago, I think, where profenofos was sprayed onto canola in that full yellow bloom stage that you see out there. And at that stage, every single blooming bee in the Western Cape is on the canola. It was an absolute total wipeout. If you don't believe me, you ask Mike Alsop, you ask Brendan, they will tell you what happened there. And profenofos is not registered on canola. And I had some real blistering fight with some of the agrochemical agents who denied that they sprayed it. And I know for a fact I've got the spray records. But I think I lost that battle 100%. But the impact on the bees was absolutely devastating in that particular time. Then we had a very unfortunate situation. I think that was about at the end of 2018, if I'm not mistaken, where I started getting calls, and Brendan must help me out here. We started getting calls from beekeepers in the Constantia Valley and other parts of the Western Cape where they grow wine grapes, that the bees are dying off in huge numbers. Now, one of my best colleagues in the Western Cape said, yeah, but it is not only because of pesticide, because at that stage, the Western Cape was in the grip of an absolute devastating wipeout drought. So the bees went to every possible food source they could find. And unfortunately, there was an ant remedy, which was a mixture of fipronil and lambda cyhalothrin. And the indication on the label was to mix that with molasses or with sugar, and then to paint onto the trunks of the vines or the vine stems, and that would actually control the ants. And no one ever thought about the fact that in the time of absolute food shortage and the bees being desperate for food, they would actually find that molasses and the sugar. They would go and eat the stuff. And if you expose a bee to fipronil and lambda cyhalothrin, there is no chance in life that bee will survive. So that was a very bad incident that happened. But we had a workshop which consisted of the wine farmers and the beekeepers, our own industry people. Mike Alsop was there and his wife was there. And I think eventually we resolved the issue. So we asked the company whose product it was, Villa Crop Protection, to remove that indication on the label. We sent out bulletins and newspaper articles. It went on the Landbou webblad, and within a week we sorted it out. But again, I'm going to point a finger to the Registrar of Act 36. It took him more than a year to approve that label amendment. So I just said to the industry, you go out and you use the compound, but you don't use your sugar, because that is the problem. So why I want to tell you this is because since we've removed the sugar and the molasses application with the fipronil, and the reason for the molasses or sugar was to attract the ants to that particular bait. So by simply applying the normal chemical on the trunks, they still have very effective ant control and zip impact on the bees. So it doesn't mean that because a pesticide is toxic to bees, that it will have a risk on the bees. It all that depends on the application. So that one, I think, was a win for us all and a win for the bees also. Now, when I get to citrus, then I'm going to make a couple of statements here that might make you very, very angry. And that is that if you do not apply your CNI strictly according to what the label tells you on that particular date, you're going to have a problem with bees dying off. I do know for a fact that people who have a small orchard, they even spray their orchards with things like imidacloprid. And then they phone me up and say, oh, I see now, but they say you must put it into the soil. So how long do I wait now for those oranges to be harvested? And I tell them, and unfortunately, you got to wait 293 days, because that is the pre-harvest interval, or that is the withholding period you got to wait after the last application before you can harvest the particular crop. And then the people get angry, but they never followed the label instructions. That is why we also see an impact on bees. I know, for example, also that chlorpyrifos, which is applied very, very widely in citrus, and I think it's going to become much less now because of the pressure from the European Union. It has a vast, vast and devastating impact on bees because some people apply it unlawfully at the wrong time on the citrus. And there was a case in the Faalwater area last year when a farmer applied chlorpyrifos on citrus in the full bloom. And man, the bees died for 40 kilometers around that particular spot simply because people did not follow labels. And then I picked up the rumor, which was confirmed recently to me by quite a few people, that the new trend, and I point a finger now at the consumer, in other words, that pumpkin who goes to Woolworths or Pick n Pay to buy his food there, they want citrus without any seeds or any pips in them, which is bloody stupid because that is actually where you find some of the most important micronutrients in all the fruit and stuff that you eat. So they want a seedless citrus. And what some farmers do to prevent any pollination and this fruit from developing seed is they deliberately go out and they spray the bees and they kill the bees to prevent pollination and the seed setting in the fruit, which is obviously, I think, a heinous crime against the bees. But that is what happens in the citrus industry, unfortunately, very often. And I want to give you an example of the palm fruit industry where I see a problem. I traveled up along the Langkloof some 4 or 5 years ago to go to a farm where they grew truffles. And it was the time when the apple orchards were in full bloom. It was absolutely stunningly beautiful. And the afternoon on the way back, I was doing it slowly because I always like to stop and look at crops and talk to the farm workers who spray the stuff because they just lack of people to talk to. And I came across a farm worker spraying in an apple orchard. And on the roadside were lots and lots of beehives that were there for pollination. So I asked him, what spuit jy? And ek spuit supermatrine. And I thought, yes, how the hell can that be when you've got bees there pollinating and you spray cypermethrin? And I told him what was going to happen there. He said, but my farm manager said I must spray them. So that is, if that is not stupidity, then I'm asking my audience today, what is stupidity? It is absolutely horrendous to think that you will have bees busy working in the orchard, making your crop, because without the bees you don't have a crop. And vrachtig, you spray one of the most toxic groups of substances on that crop in the middle of the day when the bees are busy pollinating. So that was just an incident which I thought I should highlight for you. And the same goes for the stone fruit, that I sometimes also get the same sort of stories. Right in the time when the crop are pollinated by the bees, they spray the pyrethroids and even spray neonicotinoids on crops which they're not allowed to spray at all. And lately, if I think about the last sort of 6 to 8 to 9 months, I've had incidents in Mossel Bay, George, Knysna, close to me here in Port Elizabeth, further afield in the Western Cape and the Lowveld, at berry farms where beehives were completely taken out. And the one case, I'm not sure whether that particular farmer is in the audience today or the bee farmers there, but we worked out that it was a deliberate attempt by the people that harvested blueberries to take the bees out because they were worried about the 1 or 2 bee stings. So he lost all his beehives, and he even rented in beehives from other people because he did not have enough to support that berry farm with the pollination, and he had to pay back the primary beekeeper for the loss of his hives. But it was an absolute flipping wipeout of the bees. And I think then there was a case around Mossel Bay sometime about August or September last year, where there was application of a particular pesticide on canola in full bloom, and at least 60 to 70 beehives were taken out. So I hear these things at least once a month in my life, and I ask the question, when is it going to stop? I can tell you when it's going to stop. It's going to stop when there is not a single bee left. And then agriculture in South Africa is going to collapse completely. And our biodiversity in South Africa is going to collapse completely because without the flowering plants, there the biodiversity chain is broken, because the flowering plants and the grasses, in other words, the monocots, are the base of the whole ecological pyramid. So without that, we cannot have any sound ecology or any sound ecosystem. The question is, can we do fruit production and cash crop production and berry production and whatever, flower production, export flower production, without an impact on bees? Now, understand very clearly, I've pointed a couple of dirty fingers this morning at farmers and beekeepers and the state, and even at myself. And I'm a one that believes that we should support our local farmers, and I'm not only talking about the crop farmers, but also the bee farmers. And my own personal belief as a pesticide scientist and as a chemist and a toxicologist is that there are certain things that we need to address most definitely. And the main thing that we keep on hammering about and keep on fighting about is what we call off-label application of pesticides. Now, if you look at Act number 36 of 1947, which is the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act of 1947, it forbids the application of a pesticide for any other purpose or any other method than what the label instructs you to do. Now, I had a bit of a very rude eye-opener 2 months ago, and that was because I wasn't present in a meeting that was held between Grain SA and CropLife SA. Now, we've got a very good association with the Grain Farming Association, Grain SA, and every year we've got a liaison meeting with them. And a very prominent English-speaking grain farmer in the Free State, who's a sterling farmer, as far as I'm concerned, he said he always thought that what the label says is just a guidance or a recommendation. And what the agent, in other words, the crop advisor says is what you should do. That was an eye-opener for me, that farmers believe that what the agent says is the right thing and what the label says is just an indication. No, my dear colleagues, the only legal advice that you get for a pesticide is what the label says. So if you phone me up on a Sunday morning, like it happens to me every Sunday morning, on every day of my life, in fact, from members of the public asking me for advice on how to kill a cockroach or how to do crop protection on things like, for example, I get lots of calls from black farmers on advice on how to do cabbage pest control and whatever. I am only allowed to give them advice exactly on what the label states. And I say exactly, I mean exactly. And what happens, I can tell you, and I would be bold enough to say that in 50% of all pesticide applications in the country, if not more, the pesticides are used off-label. Now let's look at those things, and I'm going to give you examples. Very often, the crop farmer, whether a cash crop farmer or a fruit farmer or a wine farmer, applies the pesticide for a crop which is not on the label. Let me give you an example. On a canola situation last year, and I know for a fact because I work very closely with soil, and I chat to the lady very often. So they do an audit on what the farmers applied. The farmer's got to supply them with the spray records. Farmers used an unregistered imidacloprid on the canola. Now, there are many imidacloprid brands in the country. Remember, Villa makes it, Bayer makes it, Syngenta makes it. Every company makes imidacloprid because it's such a good chemical to use if used correctly. But not every label of imidacloprid has, for example, oranges or navels or citrus or macadamias or whatever on that particular label. And the reason for that is that you can only apply for registration of your pesticide if you have done the testing on that particular crop to make sure it does work on the crop, that you did the breakdown curves, that you did the pre-harvest interval studies, and you did the maximum residue levels on that particular crop. And therefore, if you have not done the work on that particular crop, the registrar will not grant you registration on that particular crop, and it may not appear on your label. So even though we know that, for example, imidacloprid is registered for use on citrus, There are some of them that are not registered for citrus. So what happens then is that Jannie Gusmous comes around and said, "Oom, maar hierdie goed bevat ook imidacloprid. Jy kan hom ook gebruik want hy gaan net so goed werk as Confidor." Bullshit. That is nonsense. That is an unlawful action because you contravene Regulation 176 of 1716 of 26 July 1991, which says you may not use a pesticide for any other method or any other purpose than what the label directs you to do. So in other words, if it's not on the label of that particular crop, you may not do it. Secondly, is that the dose rates are very often ignored. Now, if you look at, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk very much today about the neonicotinoids, because that is the controversial one for bees. If that thing tells you, you apply 1 ml per 2 liters on a citrus tree, that's what you do, not 2 ml, because that will result in enough imidacloprid to move into the plant and to go right up to the flowers, into the nectar, into the pollen, where your bees as a beekeeper will go, and they will make contact with that, they will eat that, take it back to the hive, and tomorrow morning, no hive left. So a dose rate was also approved by registrar based on extremely expensive and long-term studies over 3 years in a lot of different areas to make sure that that dose rate is effective on the crop. So if you apply more than what you need to apply, you are going to be killing something, and very often it is the poor bee that takes the beating because you applied a pesticide in a high dose.
Gerhard,
yes.
Can I chirp in here just for a second? It's Brendan speaking. I've just moved onto my phone. I'm having to go somewhere.
Sure.
What we're finding also with the label requirements, it seems that with the new trend of all the nets going up everywhere, that the chemicals which are having no impact on bees in an open environment, in the closed environment, it seems to change the toxicity or the quantity of chemicals that the bees are exposed to. So I'm wondering whether the labels need to be reassessed with the growing trend of using nets, because the microclimate seems to affect the concentrations or something. Can you comment on that?
Yes, of course, Brendan. I'd like to comment. I might be one of the culprits for the netting, because very often when you get the conflict between a neighborhood which is right on the doorstep of a farm, I tell the farmer to put up a shade cloth to prevent the drift over going into the neighborhood. But what you're talking about is a more compounded effect where you've got orchards of stuff which is netted around, and that prevents sufficient air movement to disperse the chemicals. Now, when you work in an open field, the application must always be done in windy conditions below 10 km per hour, because a little bit of wind, and believe me, 10 km per hour wind is nothing. It simply helps the pesticide molecule, which is bound in a sprayed molecule or a spray droplet, to be deposited onto the target. Now, when you have netting around your orchard, for example, then that air movement is compromised, and there's a nebulous of the chemical or the spray mixture hanging in the atmosphere, and that is what is going to be affecting the bees. So I think it's an agricultural practice which then causes the particular impact on bees, and not necessarily the toxicity of the particular pesticide, Brendan. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Gerhard. Thank you. Sorry,
okay.
Just on my phone,
okay.
struggling a bit here.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, 100%. The other thing I also find is that if you look at the pesticide labels, I'm talking about the insecticides, and I looked at all the insecticides that are registered on particular crops with a potential of an impact on bees. There's always an indication of the application window. In other words, it tells you at what growth stage of the particular crop must the pesticide be applied. Now listen, I'm not saying should the pesticide be applied. It must be applied at a particular application window. And you will see, for example, on the neonicotinoids, and I think about acetamiprid will tell you, you can only apply until the beginning of bud formation. Why so? it is because it's systemic. So if you apply it at the beginning of bud formation, it's taken up by the plant. It does the job to protect the plant. But by the time the flowers start coming out and you've got pollen and nectar, the chemical is broken down to nothingness, so there won't be an impact on the bees. Okay? It will also tell you on many of the labels. And I remember at one stage I looked at, I think, an Indoxacarb label of FMC. They said there, if there are bees working in a crop, then apply the Indoxacarb late afternoon when the bees have returned back to their hives. And the reason why many labels say that is interesting, that when you apply a pesticide to a crop, and I told you that at the beginning of my presentation, and you make dermal contact, in other words, body contact of the pesticide spray mixture with the bee is basically gone. The bee will die. But if you apply the pesticide at a time when the bees are resting or early morning when the bees are not there yet, and the pesticide is dried off on the crop, and the bee makes contact with a dried surface, the impact is 90 to 96% less than when you make direct contact with the bee. So you can even use a bee toxic pesticide if you use your common sense and if you follow labels, and then you won't have a negative impact on the bees. And some of the people I work with, some of the clever farmers do that. So look out for a time when they say, okay, the bees are gone. I've got good atmospheric conditions, late afternoon, still lack of warm, there's a bit of air movement. Let's do the application now. So they can do the application, they can control the pests, and the impact for the bees is virtually nullified. What we also find is that the application method is often ignored on the pesticide labels. And I'm going to talk about two types of application regimes. One is the ground-based application, and one is the aerial application. Now, if a label doesn't say that you may do aerial application, and it doesn't have all the statutes there of SANS 10118, which is the standard for the aerial application of pesticides, that particular pesticide may not be applied by aerial application onto a crop at all. If it does say aerial application, then it can only be applied to the crop if it is in the directions for use indicated what the dosage is for aerial application. But let me tell you, in your province of the Western Cape, in the Lowveld, every year I see the planes flying with pesticides like imidacloprid, and I know for a fact, I've got the proof that imidacloprid is applied by aerial application onto crops for which that pesticide is not even registered. And my dear friends, there is no way the bees can survive that. We've had so many cases. There's a beekeeper that some of you might know. I call him Jan Beyer. He's quite a tall and a bold fellow. He's up in the north and a fantastic personality. He's mad about the bees. He's helping a lot of black beekeepers to get into beekeeping. And every year he loses vast quantities of bees because of aerial application on macadamias with imidacloprid. Now, there is no way that imidacloprid may be applied by air on macadamias. It's only for soil drains. And vrachtig people do it. And I can tell you, if I tell you that Jan must have lost 6 million rands of bees worth of bees in the past 10 years, I'm not lying to you, because of a wrongful application. Again, it's not the chemical that killed the bees. It was the incorrect method of application that killed the bees, which is the problem. So that is something that the crop farmers must take notice of, in particular when you start thinking about aerial application. And then I mentioned to you this very unsavory thing of deliberate spraying to kill the bees at the farm level and also in urban areas. Now, I get a lot of calls from the public who say, we've got bees in the garden. What do we do to kill them? So I just tell them, you're not allowed to do it. And I lie to them. I tell them bees are specially protected animals or insects. You're not allowed to kill them. If they do become a problem, then you call a beekeeper and you remove them. And that's what I do. So I do lie, I admit that, but it's for the sake of the bees. So this is the main cluster of reasons why there's an impact on bees because of pesticides. And I'm going to make a statement here. No pesticide can kill a bee. It's only a human being that can kill a bee with a pesticide. It's like in my safe up in my office, I've got a safe, I've got a couple of firearms because I'm a hunter, I'm a target shooter. My guns cannot kill any buck. My guns cannot kill any person unless I take them out of the safe and I deliberately go hunting or deliberately go and shooting people. So there's no difference between a pesticide and a firearm. It is not the entity. It is the person behind the entity that causes the damage with that particular pesticide. So I also tell people very often, I've never come across a bad pesticide, but I've come across millions and millions of bad people who just don't listen. So the question is then, can we do crop production and be compatible with the pollinator group, of which the honeybees, I think, are the most important? Now, remember, if you look at the moths, there are some moths that are critical for pollinating certain trees, and there are other little tiny bees, and there are even ants that do pollination, for example, in proteas. So we can't just talk about the bees, but the bees are the main focus. And the question is it possible at all to be a successful crop farmers and to live in harmony with the bees? And if you ask the question to the greenies and to the likes of the Daily Maverick and all these nutcases, they will tell you, no, you can't. Pesticide will kill the bees. My answer is, you can farm with crops. You can be a very successful fruit or cash crop or veggie farmer or flower farmer, whatever farmer, and be in total harmony with bees if you simply follow the rules and you simply follow your common sense and you think consequentially of what my action will be. And I've been to many farms where the farmers themselves have their own bees that they use for pollination, and they don't have an impact because they do the right thing. So what we can do then, in other words, to safeguard both the crop farmer and the bee farmer from the negative impact of the insecticides and the bees, are the following. First of all, can we think about pesticide-free, and I should actually change that to crop production, because remember, canola is also an important crop in terms of the bee story. Can I do pesticide-free crop production? The bunny huggers will tell you something, and I'm going to come back to that just now. The other question that people often pose to us, and they throw it in our faces, like now after the Konobi incident, yeah, but you must go biological, you must go natural. My friends, let me tell you one thing. There's some of these natural and biological pesticides that are flipping toxic to a bee, but hellishly toxic to a bee. So be careful about that particular one. Another question is, if we follow the label 100%, is that something we can consider as a bee safe practice in crop production? And I'm talking about all the farming in the country. And another question that we often ask and that people don't understand is, what about us moving to integrated pest management? And since I was a youngster in my rabbit days as a greenie running the poison working group up to now, I've been working and been talking and been preaching about IPM around the farming community, and I don't think there's much of an uptake in terms of IPM. In the fruit industry, yeah, but in the cash crop industry, most definitely. So let us look at the answers or the questions to these particular, or not the questions, the answers to these particular questions. If you think that you can farm today without a pesticide, think again. It is technically impossible because we work with monocultural crops. And the moment you have a monocultural crop, you've compromised the natural resistance of that particular crop against plant pests, plant diseases, and in many cases also the weeds that can impact on your things. So to think that you can take pesticides out of the market is an absolute pipe dream. Yes, me as a green, I would love to see a pesticide-free world, but it is technically impossible to farm in anything, even if you're a tree farmer like Sappi or Mondi or Ocean to Coast or whatever they call themselves. You cannot have crop production if you do not have pest control. And many people tell us, yeah, but you must go organic. Man, It is the biggest farce I've heard in my world in my life. If I go to one of the very famous retail stores, I'm not going to mention the name, they have stuff on the shelf, it is organically grown. I can tell you, all they do is, they make the 20% more expensive, put an organic sticker on that thing, and who knows what that farmer did. Organic farming is a good idea, not a bad idea. It's a good idea for somebody who grows their own crops or who runs a very intensive, highly intensive, small-scale farming operation. But don't forget, in organic farming, they also use pesticides. They also use pyrethrins. Now, please do me a favor and take a couple of bees, expose them to pyrethrins, and call me back and tell you what you see. You don't have to call me because I will tell you what you'll see. There's not going to be a single bee left if you treat them with an organic certified pesticide, namely pyrethrins. There's not going to be a single bee left if you treat them with sulfur, which is organic certified pesticide. So this idea of organic farming being friendly, environmentally friendly, is the biggest BS I've heard in my life. It's not a bad idea, but if you really want to farm organic, it takes 15 years to get your environment to become totally natural and without any chemical pesticides. So in the short term, no, it cannot solve the problem. We need pesticides if we want to do proper crop production for the masses that need the food. The other question was, what about getting rid of all the synthetic pesticides and going to biologicals and naturals? It is not really feasible because you must understand one thing, that the naturals and biologicals are often not. Can you hear me? System died on me, yeah? And somebody just tell me if they hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, I just took my headset off because the thing died out. The biological pesticides are fantastic stuff. The natural ones are fantastic. If you talk about biologicals like bacillus and metarhizium, the naturals like neem oil, which contains azodrafting, they are fantastic. But they need a particular climatic condition to work effectively. And that's why people have a disbelief in them, because a typical backyard farmer who doesn't understand climatology will now go and buy an expensive biological, apply it in the heat of the day, it's going to die out before doing the job, and we'll say, hierdie bloody goed werk. But if you include biologicals and naturals in your pesticide regime, in other words, with the synthetic pesticides, they will certainly help you to become more biologically compatible and more compatible with the bees in any way. But you cannot just simply say we want to ban all the synthetic pesticides and only go for biologicals and naturals because they're not going to work. There comes a time, for example, if you think about woolly aphid on the fruit crops and vineyards, you've got to hit them with a big hammer. And the biologicals are soft hammers that you cannot use. But if you have proper IPM, that's where they come into play. The third one there is, what about following the pesticide labels 100%? And I want to tell you today, I can guarantee you, if you as a crop farmer follow the label 100%, your chance of having a negative impact on the bees is very, very, very limited, if at all. And I can tell you, you can ask Brendan, you can ask some of the other beekeepers that I can't remember names of now, and also Mike also. Every single bee incident we investigate is because people did not follow the label directions. They're not advisory, they are legal instructions on how to use the product. So please, if we can go to that point where we say every boer in the country will follow the label 100%, that will sort out what we have in terms of pesticide impact. So if the pesticide agent or the crop advisor tells you anything which is not on the label, he or she or it is automatically contributing to the act and will automatically result in some negative impact on the living organisms, which might be the bees, it might be your dog, it might be the cattle,
it might even be your own people in your own homestead. The last one here is, what about IPM? That is something which I think we should push like hell in South Africa, from CropLife side and from the beekeeper side and from organized agriculture, because it is the way to go in the future. And I'm not going to explain to you all the science behind IPM, but IPM is basically making use of all the possible tools in such a way that you do the maximum pest control at an affordable rate with a minimum impact on the natural environment. It's not easy because you have to have a total different type of thinking in your mind if you want to go towards IPM. But the fruit farmers know what IPM is all about. So you plan your stuff ahead and you know what you're going to get. You use your computer tools and you use the biologicals when you start off in the season, or you use the biologicals late in the season. But that is a way to go. So for me, important things here is that, yes, we have to start using more and more biologicals and naturals in our pest control. We cannot do away right now with the chemical pesticides. Maybe in 50 years time from now, I don't know, but that is not feasible at this stage. If you follow the labels 100%, then I don't think I'm going to get the calls about bee poisoning, but we've got to push the idea of IPM like mad, because that will not only save our bees and be good for biodiversity, it will make for safer foodstuffs we provide to the market, and it is a lack a new way of farming. And the IPM also includes this idea of soil health. Some of you might have heard about it. Many of our companies work on that. There are a couple of real fly-by-nights who sell all sorts of gunks to farmers and make vast promises, but soil health is not an easy thing to work on. It's a 15-year program to get your soil to become totally healthy and that you can start moving away from certain pesticides. But all of these things will eventually help us to become bee-friendly farmers in the country. But don't think you're going to do it easily. It takes extra work. So in the IPM toolbox, the integrated pest management toolbox, we've got various different options. First of all, synthetic pesticides, they have to be there. Without them, you want to try and farm, good luck, my friend. Tell me after the year what happened to you. And I know for a fact, I get calls from thousands of people around the country every year asking about pest control and stuff like this. And your particular province is most now actually a different country. They've got their own flag and they've got their own capital, Cape Town. And every Gautenger that becomes full of Gauteng goes down to Cape Town. They become an organic farmer. And then 2 years down the line, I get the call, but the goggles are eating all my crops. What do I do now? I want to be organic. I'll tell them, forget about it. Start becoming an IPM farmer, where you use synthetics and naturals and biologicals, and then start becoming a real environmentally friendly farmer, because organic farming, forget it, it is not going to work. Secondly, we have natural pesticides. And if you look at things, did you know that abamectin is a totally natural compound? Did you know that all the things, the spirotetramats, they're all natural compounds? If you look at things like, for example, azadirachtin, which is in neem oil, it's a natural compound. They work damn well, and they work just as well as most of the synthetic pesticides, if not better. And then obviously, we see a plethora of new biologicals coming into the market, exciting stuff, fantastic stuff that do pest control in terms of plant pests. They do disease control. There's even some stuff coming in now for weed control. So it's fantastic to see that 15% of our market is already on the biological side, and the impact is normally vastly less than that of synthetic pesticides. So that is part of your toolbox. And then, especially for the fruit industry, the semiochemicals, which include all the pheromones. So for example, instead of just waiting for the moths to invade your crops, you have pheromone traps to trap them and to keep them out of your crop. Or you've got pheromones to disturb their breeding and their mating. And these things are all part of IPM. Semiochemicals are very well deployed in the fruit industry, but at this stage, not really so much in the cash crop sector, but I think the fall armyworm opened the eyes of the grain farmers. Understand they must also start using trapping, at least to monitor what's going on with the worm crop or the worm pest in the crops. And then lastly, then predators. We are now talking to, I think, 4 companies who bring predatory insects and nematodes into the country, and they're becoming more important. We're trying to define a regulatory regime for them, to put them in under Act 36, but these things also become important. So you can find, for example, certain wasps, you can find nematodes, you can find things that you can release in your orchards that can also help you with pest control, which are focused on that particular target organism in your crop. So if you take those 5 elements, those are all the sort of, call them chemical or semiochemical types of tools that you can use in terms of your IPM toolbox. But what bothers me, and I'm not really talking to the fruit farmers, I'm talking about the cash crop farmers. They don't believe in early warning systems. Now, the early warning system means that you got to know when can I expect invasion of a particular pest or disease in my crop. And the way to do that is to make use of the pheromones and to make use of weather data. And CROPLIFE is now talking to a group of climatologists on adding on a data tool to Agri-Intel that you can use the Agri-Intel also to forecast what can you expect in terms of pest and disease outbreak, and that will bring you then back to what's an Agri-Intel in terms of which pesticides to deploy to control the particular pest or disease, or say no, it is not going to have an impact, so don't worry about that. So you must be prepared to know what you're going to be fighting. It's like in the military. If you don't know where the enemy is going to attack you, how the hell can you defend yourself? So to me, the pheromones are fantastic, and I can see in the citrus and in the fruit industry how well these things work in terms of warning the farmers about invasion of things like codling moth and false codling moth and other thingamajigs. We're also lucky to see that there are many companies operating in the Western Cape with baits and lures. In other words, these are registered pesticides. So instead of having to spray your crops with the pesticide, you got it in a bait. So you put the bait onto the tree with a little bit of chemical in the bait. It is much more target selective, and it has much less of a biological impact in the broad environment. And they also use pheromone lures to draw the insect to that particular bait with a chemical to control the particular pest. So those are new tools coming in. It's a case of people having to stop or to start deploying these things in the agricultural practices. And then very important for the bees, in particular when you talk about IPM. When is my best time to do the pest control, not only for efficacy of the pesticide on the particular pest or disease or the weed, but also then to safeguard the bees against any possible negative impact on the bees. Now, going back to what I said a couple of slides ago, I am of the firm belief that if you do a particular application window at the correct time, your impact on the bees will be absolutely minimal, if anything at all. And one thing I've got to mention also here is targeted application. And with a new intensive farming and with a precision farming, we've got so many tools. I see drones being deployed to fly over crops to identify infestation spots in crops, that you don't have to go and spray the entire orchard, but you target a particular spot in the crop with a disease or a pest. What does it do? It saves the farmer a lot of money on worker time, tractor time, and pesticide. And it also saves the environment because you're not doing blanket applications. Remember, I'm 62 years old, so I remember from back in the old days with the maize farmers, it was the practice to spray them with a very heavy gif, like the old Dildren, sort of beginning of the season, to make sure everything died on the crop. Those days are completely gone. So we're moving towards a regime now where a farmer is no longer a farmer. And I think maybe I'm using the term incorrectly today. I should talk about a crop producer. A crop producer is a businessman, is a scientist, is a forward thinker. And that's why IPM becomes important, because IPM makes a farmer into a businessman and a forward thinker and somebody who's looking after the environment for the sake of himself and the people after him and the broader biodiversity out there. I've also put the soil health here in red and inverted commas, and I just want to tell you, it is a very important thing to consider for the future. Very important. And there are a couple of very good scientists in the Western Cape that can teach you about this. And some of our own member companies can teach you about this. But be very careful about the con artists that come and want to sell you this and that with a promise of immediate results. It is BS because it doesn't give immediate results. It takes years to restore the soil health. And let me tell you, I've got a very good friend. His name is Johan van Zyl. He's a very big export farmer in Groblersdal. And I must tell you, I've only seen one farm which was more beautiful and well structured. That was the farm of Llewellyn Labaskagni in Letsetele. But Johan's farm is a mint farm. And when I met him many years ago, he told me on his own, long before this idea of soil health came into being, he started looking after the soil, making the soil more biologically active, making the soil more healthy by introducing carbon and organic material and nematodes and stuff. And he told me for 7 years, there was no response. He said the 8th year, there was a massive positive response from the plants to the point that he had to cut back on his pesticide application because he was actually wasting chemicals. So it's something for the future, something exciting. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of patience because it will certainly not be easy thing to work on in the short term. I didn't include something they call BMAP, but that unfortunately came off. The idea of BMAP was to have an app that would connect the bee farmer with a crop farmer to warn when application of pesticides is going to happen. But there's still a chance it might come together in the near future. And as things come together, we will keep you informed about that. And then I want to ask all the farmers, and I'm talking about the bee farmers and the crop farmers. Your surroundings on your farms, in other words, your hedgerows, the road verges, your natural renosterveld in the Western Cape and those places. Look after it. Give it the best chance of operating naturally. Don't interfere there because that is your, call it, receptacle area for wild bees to come in and to supplement your what I can call the tame bees and to provide nutrition for the bees at the time of drought or the time of hardship for the bees. And if you follow all these things, I know it's a lot of stuff to think about, but that will make you a better farmer. It will make you a better person for the future. And I'm going to start ending off now with my presentation. I still want to, I want you guys all to take this story of consequential thinking to heart. So I'll tell people, think before you do. And you've got two shoulders. On the left-hand side, you've got the little white one, your guardian angel. On the right-hand side, you've got the little red one with the fork, the little devil. If the left-hand shoulder feels a tap, it says, hey, pass up, you must know there's something happening. But most people listen to the right-hand side where the little devil says, man, to hell with everything, do what you want to do and take a chance because you might not get caught out. The problem is you might not get caught out. But the answer or the question is, what is suffering in the process? And it is very often our precious bees that take the beating. Now, let me tell you why I think this is important, this consequential thinking. Because of Newton's third law. That's a law of physics, but it applies to normal human life as well. And that law says, for every action, there's a similar but opposite reaction. In other words, it tells you if I do something, what is going to be the result? If I spray today without thinking about the bees, and I kill off all the bees in the natural veld around me, and I kill off all the bees in the hives, the opposite reaction will be next season. I won't have bees to pollinate my crop, and I won't have a crop. That is what Newton's third law means for a crop farmer. So you should always think about consequential thinking, think about Newton's third law, and think of what am I doing, what is going to be the result. And if your net result of what you're going to be doing is of benefit to yourself and your surroundings, then go for it. But if your net result is going to be damaging to the environment, then you should step back and say, let me think again. Okay, and one of the most recent impacts we had was where somebody sprayed canola in the middle of the day in high temperatures with a pesticide that was registered canola, and the bees were working there, and 40 beehives got wiped out completely. So that person had just thought to himself, what is the consequence going to be if I spray my crop now with this particular pesticide? He should have had the answer, I'm going to kill the bees. He should have said, okay, let me wait until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, where it's cooled down, the bees have gone back to the hives to go and rest and work in the hives. No bees there. I can apply my pesticide because it wasn't a big crop field, and the impact would have been absolutely minimal. But because there was no consequential thinking, this person had a vast impact on his surroundings. And unfortunately, in that case, the surroundings were the bees belonging to a beekeeper. So I'm going to give you a little flow chart here. The question you should ask yourself, will my pesticide, and I'm not talking about insecticides only, I'm talking about insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, because some of the fungicides might be damaging. Sorry. Some of the herbicides, in connection with a neonicotinoid, become extremely toxic to bees. So you ask the question, is the pesticide something that might affect my bees? If the answer is no limited, then the thing is, you follow the labels 100% to minimize any potential impact. If the answer is yes, it will have a potential impact on bees, you will see it on the label. Then you will ask yourself, but if I can't use this one because of the potential impact on bees, is there an effective alternative pesticide which will not have an impact on the bees? If the answer is no, you ask yourself the question, how can I mitigate that potential impact on the bees? And then you implement the mitigation measures, which I think I've discussed with you this morning now, enough to understand that you can use a pesticide with a bee toxicity by using mitigation measures to prevent that impact from materializing. So don't come and tell me, anybody, beekeeper, crop farmer, greenie, Greenpeace, whatever, that all pesticides are toxic. Yes, they are. But you can still apply the pesticide, even if it's toxic to a bee, by implementing certain mitigation measures. But there might be certain times where you say, but that particular impact is going to be there and not going to be possible to mitigate, to protect the bees. And then you must consider alternative ways to mitigate the potential impact if you have to apply the pesticide. And the most important one is then, the middle one, is to make sure the bees are gone from your area. In other words, if there are beehives around your crop or close to the crop, you as a crop farmer have a duty to inform the beekeeper that, listen, I have to apply this particular toxic organophosphate to my crop tomorrow or the day thereafter because my crop is going to be wiped out by the Russian aphid. So please, Mr. Beekeeper, can you move your bees away from the area and leave them away for the area for 3 or 4 days because I don't want you to kill my bees. Some people say we can simply cover the beehives with a tarpaulin to prevent them from being contaminated. No, that is not going to work. You take the bees away from the area and you make sure they're far away enough that that spray drift will not get onto the bees and you don't have an impact on the bees. But what might be better in the long-term future? And that's what you're going to discuss with your crop advisor or your crop consultant, and there are quite a few of them that are really bloody good. And I think there even some of them this morning in the meeting. Look at the new pest management program for your particular crop, which becomes totally IPM and soil health focused, because in the long run, that is going to take away all the risk that you have for bees, and you'll be a better farmer, you'll be more successful, you'll make more impact, more profit out of your crop, and your impact on the bees will be virtually nothing. And my question is then, and I'm sorry about the spelling mistake there, what about creating an offset for your potential impact on bees and other pollinators? And that offset means, like in the USA, for example, if they tell somebody, right, you can build a dam in that particular valley, but then you've got to buy out that land and establish a nature reserve to offset your impact. So if a farmer's operations with a pesticide on any crop will have a negative impact on bees, what should a farmer then do to help mitigate that offset or to minimize the offset? It's like in my case, I'm going to take myself as a hunter. I only hunt on 2 or 3 farms in the country because I'm very particular on what I do and how I hunt my animals. And if I go onto a farm, I always ask them, I want to see your stock record of what's in the farm. I want to see the sex ratios of the animals. And then I say, okay, this year I can hunt 5 female impala, or I got to take off 14 male impala. And that is the way I offset my impact, because I know if I take off that small amount of impala, that impact is not going to be, and I've made my offset. So what a farmer can do is start planting indigenous flowering plants. Aloes are there by the thousands. And we've got fynbos in the Western Cape that support bees like mad. So you've got all these things that can work there to help you, to help the bees to sort themselves out and to be healthy. So look at planting natural plants. We've got feigies, we've got fynbos, we've got aloes. I even know of beekeepers that plant their own canola as a trap crop to keep their bees close to them, that they go into to other places where they might be impacted upon by pesticide application. And I think it's important then, lastly, if you look at a mixture of plants, to make sure that there's food year-round for the bees. And the good idea about this is it will take away that problem of the monocultural foods that the bees ingest on a day-to-day basis. The bee has a choice. Today I eat pollen from a protea. Tomorrow I eat from canola. Tomorrow I go to feigie, and the day thereafter go to fynbos, and then I go to aloes, and I go back to the farmer's crops, and that way I get a good diverse diet instead of eating a McDonald's burger every day of my life. So the last few things from CropLife SA. I think it's important to be proactive, in other words, to invest in making sure you know when the pests are coming, because then your pesticide use will be lower anyway and more target specific. I also urge you all to use Agri-Intel. I know you've got to pay a user license fee, but it is very little for the vast amount of information available on Agri-Intel. So basically 95% of all the pesticide labels are on Agri-Intel, available for people that subscribe to Agri-Intel. Look at computer models to help you to forecast the weather, because weather will tell you what can I expect as a pest or disease to come into my crop, and that will go along with your scouting to say, okay, I can see the codling moths coming in, now I must make a plan to get them out of the system. And very seriously, especially for the fruit farmers, you must start incorporating biologicals and naturals into your pest program. And then lastly is, please, the label instructions are there to be followed like the 10 commandments of the Bible. Not what the consultant tells you, not what the agrochemical agent tells you, not what another crop producer or your fellow farmer tells you, not what a crop advisor like myself tells you. It is only what the label tells you, which is what you may do with a pesticide, because if you don't, you contravene the act. But that's not the major issue. You contravene the safety of your crop, the safety and health of the crop you produce for the market, and the safety and health of the environment, including our precious bees. And I just think you must look at this last slide from a marketing perspective. The consumers are becoming more environmentally conscious, and they drive the market forces. And they also influence the political agenda, because remember, registration of pesticides is a very political thing. And the crops that you produce and export overseas is very political. So an environmentally conscious consumer sector will very certainly influence the political agenda and influence international trade. And if that's not handled correctly, that then influences the regulatory agenda, where the regulatory agenda like the European Food Safety Association will tell you now we ban the use of chlorpyrifos, The chlorpyrifos in the European Union is completely out because the consumer says, I do not want chlorpyrifos in my food. They run to the politicians say to the regulatory people, ban the stuff, it is gone. And what I can also tell you, and I've experienced it again now with the Konobi incident, that the power of the activists and the lobbyists, who are mostly people who know nothing about the topic, but despite that, the power of those people is very, very strong and very important. And they often make the consumer more conscious. But the conscience I'm mentioning, or the consciousness I'm mentioning there, is not a well-informed consciousness. Okay, because the consumer tells me, like many of my very good friends, I only buy from Woolworths because the food is safe. I said, excuse me, who says you that? I eat food from Woolworths, which I don't really support very much because I think they pull the wool out of our faces very often. But I eat food from Pick n Pay, from Spar, from Checkers, from blah, blah, blah. But the activists influence that particular mind of the consumer, which goes around in circles, eventually coming to regulatory agenda. And believe me, they are also very hard behind the political agenda. In the US and European Union, the Pesticide Action Network is working much harder than you as a beekeeper, myself as a local person, and all the farmers in the country. So this is what's going to happen. And eventually, if they succeed, the pesticides will get out of the market. We won't have food production. We won't have crop production. And you as beekeepers won't have a job for your bees. So we all have to look after the whole story to make sure things don't fall apart. Because very often, these activists and the political agenda and regulatory agenda is driving trade barriers. So why do you think they keep on adjusting the MRLs in the European Union? Is to keep South African produce like our citrus from entering the American markets and the European market to protect their own farmers. So it is a huge political plethora and a huge political gemors going on around this. But in the end, and I'm going to end off now, is that I'm of the firm belief that if we do things the right way, we can have bees, we can have successful farmers, we can have healthy, affordable, nice to eat, safe crops to eat. We can have a lot of successful beekeepers, and we can have a healthy environment. If we all play ball, we all participate in looking after our bees and doing the right thing. And with that, I'm ending off, and I'm not going to read through all the stuff, but I would also like to thank all the people that always help me, and a lot of the beekeepers do a lot to help me with all these things. So thank you very much. I'm open to any questions from the audience.
Gerhard, I'm just gonna, from my side, okay, let's hear. Is there any questions before I throw in my 2 cents? Any questions?
Yeah.
Let's see. James was first. James, you can go.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, I just wanting to find out the impact. I've read a couple of studies from the US on products that were supposedly safe for bees, but when mixed together and applied at the same time as a cocktail, the lethal dosage actually is much higher. So the effect on the bees would be much more when mixed together with other things that were also relatively safe. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, definitely. You must understand there is always a potential if you mix 2 chemicals together, or that there's a synergistic effect. So let's say, for example, the LD50 of something on a, or I'm going to take it in simple terms, the 1 + 1 + 1 is 2. Let's say the impact on a bee is 1 for compound number 1, and the impact of compound number 2 is also 1. The combined compact of the 2 compounds, if they synergistic, might be 5 instead of 2. And it's been shown, for example, if there's any 2,4-D in a system, and you add thiamethoxam, then the thiamethoxam, which is already extremely toxic, becomes 10,000 times more toxic to the bee. So that's why we tell people, if it is not on the label, do not mix the chemicals, because it's not only for the bee safety, environmental safety, but it's also for potential crop damage. So you're 100% right. There are potentials for, call them in inverted commas, bee friendly chemicals. I wouldn't even use the word friendly, but bee compatible chemicals do not have an impact on bees. But if you add them together in a spray tank, there is a grave potential for them to becoming vastly toxic and taking the bees out completely. So that is reality. Good question. Thank you.
Flo, you've indicated?
Yeah, thanks, Johan. Yes, I've got one question. And yeah, thanks, Gerhard. I think it's always good that we have these talks there. They are refreshing and they remind us when we are out there what to look out for. When you started, you spoke about the contact exposure and how deadly it can be and so on. But then what we've been struggling with, and I speak under correction because I don't know where the discussions are at the moment, is that we've been struggling to get going a protocol in terms of testing when we have bee poisoning and so on. You know, and table protocol that can be admissible or used as concrete evidence to prove that pesticide X has indeed led to the killing of bees and so on. How far are we with that? And if indeed this, you know, it's easy to determine the contact exposure, why are we still struggling? I'm just struggling to put my head around this, because I thought it would be easy, since you can establish that the contact with the chemical is the more adverse one. So if you can maybe just help me around that, you know, just where are we?
Okay.
What can we do?
Good question. I don't even have to write up the protocol. The protocol is simple. When there's an impact on bees, and it's always seen at the beehive, in two senses: either the beehive is completely empty, so the bees died in the field, so the beekeeper has no idea where the bees died, but mostly they start seeing the bees coming back, and the bees show some neurological symptoms. So they're in a car, they walk around, they don't know what they're doing, and they start dying off. At that point, it's a very good idea to collect. Sorry, I just want to do this call. At that point, it's a very good idea to take one of these, the large 1 liter jars that you use for the olives. You can buy them from many shops. To fill the jar completely with the dead bees, but I'm talking about getting at least 500 grams of dead bees. Put them in the fridge. And then you make contact with me, and I'll tell you which lab to take them to, because Herschel and Guinness in the Cape can do it. There's also V&M Analytical in Georgia can do it. And there might be one other lab in the Cape can do it. Now you must understand that 10 years ago, it would have been a mission to try and get that analyzed, because the technology wasn't that advanced. But nowadays, we can detect most of the chemicals at the levels of parts per billion, in other words, microgram per kilogram. And in most of the samples that I submitted together with Mike Elsop, we did find the culprit chemicals in the bees. So your protocol is simple: collect the bees, keep them cool, or keep them frozen. Let me know where you are, and then we make a plan to get them off to the laboratory. They test them, and in all the cases, we were able to find which chemicals kill the bees. I think with the one last year sometime, we never found the one particular chemical, but mostly the labs are good enough to go and trace which chemical caused the damage. And why I want you to call me is because, and I don't think I'm clever, but I know what to look for, and I can guide the lab on which chemical to go and test for, that they don't have to struggle to do a broad scale testing of the stuff. So I can tell them, for example, yes, we believe it's a neonicotinoid based on what the farmer told me, or it's a pyrethroid, or it might be indoxacarb, or it might be, for example, fipronil. So that also helps. So all the information in the pot, together with your sampling, makes the protocol correct. So, but if you want to send me email and want me to send you a short protocol, I can do that for you, no problem.
Thanks, Gerhard. Any more questions from anybody else?
Johan, sorry.
Yes, Lo?
Go again. There's a question in the chat box from Daniel. Can I read it? Or is Gerhard able to see the chat box? I'm not sure.
Can you maybe just read me the question? I saw some
Okay.
chat boxes, but I don't use this format very often, so I don't know what it is.
Okay, no problem. I'll read it for you. Are there any suggestions for plant to plant that will flower during January to April in the Southern Cape? I think this is basically on forage. I don't know.
On forage.
Yeah, I think this is more of a forage one. I don't know if there are any beekeepers from Southern Cape here. If not, I'll just type a response in the chat box. You don't have to respond to it.
Okay, to answer that question is going to be difficult, but what I recommend for you guys, go to Kirstenbosch. You've got that bookshop there, and they've got an enormous number of books on different bioclimatic regions of the country. And then buy one of the books of the flowering plants of the Western Cape region, or for example of the Renosterveld or the Sandveld, whatever, and look at that. And that will give you an indication of which plants are the plants that will flower at that particular time. Okay, so I can't give you a particular answer on that, but there's a lot of succulents that you can plant. There's a lot of the protea plants you can plant, ericas and stuff like this, but it will be better to get a book and just read up on the book and get the information. You can also go to the nursery at Kirstenbosch, which is around the corner from you. They sell a lot of indigenous plants, and normally those people can also guide you on which plants you can buy or seed you can buy to plant on your farm that will give you the foraging in different times of the particular season.
Okay, Gerhard, thanks for that. Flo, anything more?
No, that's fine. I think that was the last one. I've also just posted a link in the chat. That's to the Sunday website where we have bee-friendly plant list that we developed from the 2011 to 2014 project. So all those different links are free, and you can also download the material free, including that nice book by Johan Smeyer, The Bee Plants of South Africa, which is also free to download on PDF. So that link is in the chat box. Johan, yeah, thanks. I don't see any other thing in the chat box.
Okay. Gerhard, something that I want to throw in here is you've mentioned, most probably you have mentioned it earlier in your presentation, but the difference between a sunset spray and a sunrise spray, because what normally happens is a guy starts spraying 4 o'clock in the morning, and the bees start working 6:30, 7:15 in spring on a nice day, and so there's still a half tank left, and the guy is spraying until 8 o'clock, so he knocks the bees. But you've mentioned something to me regarding temperatures of the difference between sunset and sunrise. Can you just explain that to us?
Okay. Many people believe that the early morning spray is going to be, call it a bee beneficial one. It's not true, because there's still a lot of dew on the plants. So your spray mixture won't be dry by the time the bees get there. So that is, I would think, a higher situation for the bees. A late afternoon spray, when your temperature is still anything between 16 and about 25 degrees Celsius, is a far better option, because the bees are gone. They're not going to come back until the next morning, so the spray mixture will have time to dry off on the surface. And remember, the drying off is not just drying off in terms of getting rid of all the volatiles and the water that you sprayed with, but it also binds the chemicals to the surface because of all the adjuvants in that. So a late afternoon spraying is a far better option than an early morning spraying, because the early morning spray is subject then to the dew on the plants, which might not be a good idea for the bees. Okay, so that's one thing important. And just to mention something else about your temperature question. When you spray any pesticide of any nature at a temperature of over 30 degrees Celsius, you're taking a fat chance, because the chance of the droplets evaporating the solvent off is very good, and then the chemical molecules will be suspended in the air in what we call a sol, and that little molecule cannot go down to earth with gravitation. It will drift on the air for miles and miles and miles and be having an impact very, very far off target. So you've got to check these things, and you've got to check the labels and speak to your good crop advisor about these particular entities.
Gerhard, thanks for that. And then something I want to throw in to the attendees, although there's not very much growers here present this morning, but me myself was farming for 28 years, so I think I've got a really good knowledge of deciduous fruit farming, specifically apples, pears. If you've had 3 days of full bloom of favorable temperatures, the job has been done. You can remove the bees. What traditionally happened, some growers want to keep the bees in the orchards until the very last flower, or the last 4 or 5% flowers remain on the trees. And it's really not necessary. Those flowers are the fruit you're going to take out. It's a small fruit. All you're doing is you creating job creation for the bin sorters. I'm not going to mention the company's name in respect to them, but I've literally removed bees last year, 3 days after full bloom in pears, and they've had an all-time record crop. And that farm production figures was a new record crop each year. So it's really, if you've had enough bees in the orchard, if you follow the recommendations, there's no need to keep the bees longer than 3 days. If you want to make sure, keep it 4 days, but then you must remove it. And the other thing is, Gerhard, I think that growers must communicate with each other. It doesn't help you tell me to remove my bees tomorrow, I do it, and then your neighbor still have got bees on his farm, and you start spraying hard chemicals, taking out the neighbor's bees. So I think it's just we as beekeepers and growers, we must communicate 120% with each other, not trying to be prescriptive to each other, but to work hand in hand. That's my penny drop. So I don't know if there's anything more you want to comment on, Gerhard, and if there's any more questions.
Johan, can I just comment on this communication story? It is one of the biggest failures of modern man. We've got these incredible tools called WhatsApp and all these other social things. And I don't understand why there's not this direct and 100% close collaboration between the bee farmers and the crop farmers. And that's why my friend who's not here today, Oscar Mandelmeyer, started up with the idea of the bee map, which I still hope they will develop in the future as a tool to communicate electronically between the crop farmer and the bee farmer. And I find it strange, because when I used to work on farms in my student days, and it was fantastic, because for me to go to the co-op was the highlight, because there you sit and you drink your coffee, you eat your rusk, and you talk all the crap for the day, get all the information. But we were in constant contact with our neighbors about everything. But modern day farmers, and I'm also talking about modern day beekeepers, we don't talk to each other. So if we can start a communication forum somehow, that beekeepers and crop farmers that have a need for bees in the area talk on a regular basis, I think it will solve a lot of the problems. And when we had our workshops, I cry for Nick, who might not be here today, and Brendan will remember, when we had a workshop from the Cape in 2018 or so, we discussed this issue of the communication, and it was said by everybody, if we do proper communication, 95% of the bee killings will be stopped, because we will know what's going to happen on the crop and the orchard and the bees and the pesticides. So I think between all of us, and maybe I should chat to Chloe about this offline, we should really develop a communication tool and make it like compulsory for people to communicate. You know, you don't have to call your neighbor, send a WhatsApp. Yes, I get 50 WhatsApps a day, but they work like a bomb. But you have to inform people that I have to do crop protection. You've got to remove your bees. And also a finger pointing, my last comment here before I jump off is, I get a complaint sometimes from crop farmers who say to me, I wake up in the morning and here in my orchard, 40 beehives. They're not marked, they're not numbered. Who the hell stuff is it? I got to spray today, so what do I do now? So there are rogue big operators that basically steal the opportunity to do business, and then they work at nighttime. So sure, I think it's a case of our communication needs to be jacked up significantly if we want to address the bee and crop protection issue adequately.
Gerhard, yeah, thanks for that. I'm pretty sure out of this presentation, a lot of things are gonna come forward and surface, and we still have got a lot of work to do to enhance the sustainability of our bee population, and as well as the sustainability of fruit production. So yeah, if there's no more questions from WCBA side, we just want to really thank you,
Johan.
Gerhard. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, before you close, go again. Just one more question, not directly linked to the bees, but has to do with, again, just the pesticides. It's from Tianus Bosch. I don't know if he's still with us, because I saw he said he was leaving. But then it's one quick question. Any guidelines for using imidacloprid on large oak trees or vetting coat to treat aphids? And then he says the trees are about 20 meters or so in size.
It is not going to work because it is not registered for that purpose, and the trees are too big and too tall, so the chemical will not reach the target. So it is not going to work.
Any advice for that? What he could look into?
Can I give you my cell phone number? Just write it down. Whoever asked the question, and phone me afterwards, and I try and give advice, because I don't have Agri Intel open with me, because that's not an easy question. So my number is 082.
Just one.
Double four.
I'll just type it in chat. 082
446
446
89
89
46.
46. Okay, thank you very much.
Just drop me a WhatsApp and I'll check out what you can possibly do. But I can tell you, imidacloprid on the tree of that size is going to be a futile effort. It's not going to work.
All right, thanks. Johan, thank you. That's all from me.
Okay, then Gerhard, once again, thank you very much from CropLife's side. And like I said, I'm pretty sure this is just the beginning of an ongoing process. And yeah, we're looking forward to hear from you soon again. And I'm pretty sure we can learn from each other. From WCBA side, once again, thank you very much. And thanks for all the attendees. We really appreciate it. We can do nothing without people taking the message out to the broad public.
Thanks, Johan. And the office there from my side, you've got my number. Talk to me, please. The more talking we do, the better.
Thanks. Okay, so then we call the meeting off. Thanks, Gerhard. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep well all. Bye-bye.